The phone rang on a morning too silent to be real. I was still sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the cup of cold coffee, trying to remember if I had taken my meds or just thought about taking them. Since my husband died, the days had lost their shape, as if they were all the same, blurred by a tiredness that did not go away. When I saw an unknown number on the screen, I almost let it ring until it dropped, but something, perhaps the old habit of answering, made me slide my finger. The voice on the other end was polite, too professional for that phase of my life. He introduced himself as a real estate broker and asked, with frightening naturalness, when I intended to vacate the house. For a few seconds, I thought I had misunderstood. I asked him to repeat it, and he repeated it, in the same words, as if he were talking about something simple, already solved, something that everyone knew, except me. I felt the ground disappear under my feet, even though I was sitting. My mouth dried up, my hands began to tremble, and I leaned on the table as if I was going to fall. I asked him what he was talking about, and he replied that the house had already been sold, that the contract was signed, and that he just needed to align the next steps with me. With me? That word echoed like a cruel irony. I looked around the kitchen, at the cabinets I had chosen myself, at the mark on the wall where we measured our son's height years ago, at the window where my husband used to look every morning. That house was not an asset. It was my whole story. And someone was telling me, with a bureaucratic calm, that she was no longer mine. I tried to explain that there must be a mistake, that I hadn't put the house up for sale, that I had barely been able to get out of bed since the funeral. He paused uncomfortably and said that he understood, but that the documents were in order, signed, notarized. When I heard the word signed, I felt a knot in my stomach that took my breath away. After I hung up, I stood there, motionless, for long minutes. The house seemed quieter than ever, as if it was watching me, waiting for a reaction I couldn't get. My head was spinning, trying to remember meetings, conversations, papers. I remembered people talking to me, someone saying, sign here, someone saying, it's just a formality. At that time, I trusted everything they told me. I didn't question, I didn't read properly, I didn't understand half of the sentences. I was doped with sadness, medicine and blind trust in those who said they were taking care of me. I never imagined that caring could mean taking everything away without asking. I picked up the envelope of bills on the table and saw, among them, a paper that I had not noticed before. A logo I didn't recognize, my name printed in formal letters, and a bad feeling growing inside my chest. My hands were shaking so much that I almost tore the envelope when I opened it. And in that moment, I understood that the call wasn't a mistake, it was just the beginning. It was there, in that kitchen that suddenly no longer seemed mine, that I realized something terrible. While I was burying my husband, someone had buried my right to decide. And I still had no idea who, or how far it would go. The fact that you are here, choosing to hear this story so far, says a lot about your sensitivity and attention. What comes next is not just something I have experienced, but a truth that many people carry in silence and that deserves to be heard. If you believe that stories like this need to keep being told, subscribe to the channel, because this isn't just about me, it's about all of us. After the call, I walked around the house as if I was in strange territory. Each step echoed more than it should, as if the sound gave away my presence in a place that, somehow, no longer belonged to me. I ran my hand over the furniture, the walls, as if trying to make sure that something is still real. That house had always been my refuge, and now it seemed to watch me in silence, an accomplice to a secret that I still did not understand. Since my husband's death, the days had become a sequence of automatic tasks. Waking up, taking medication, pretending everything was fine when someone called. I didn't really cook anymore, I didn't turn on the television, I didn't receive visitors. I lived surrounded by memories and a constant feeling of tiredness, as if the grief had a physical weight and accumulated on my shoulders. I remembered the first nights alone in that oversized bed. Of the empty space next to me, of the smell that still sounded like him, of the conversations I kept thinking. I wasn't prepared for important decisions. I could barely decide what to wear or what to eat. Trusting others was the only way I found to keep functioning. My son said he was taking care of everything. He spoke firmly, with that confidence he always had, as if he knew more than I did about what was best for me. Mom, don't worry about it now, he repeated. And I obeyed, relieved that someone took control when I no longer had the strength for anything. I passed by the living room and stopped in front of the photo shelf. Weddings, birthdays, old trips. In almost all of them, my son smiled next to us. I tried to reconcile that image with the broker's voice saying that my house had been sold. Something didn't fit, but I still didn't know where the crack was. I sat on the couch and closed my eyes, trying to remember when those papers had appeared. I vaguely remembered an afternoon when my head hurt too much, someone putting documents in front of me, a pen being pushed in my direction. It's just to make things easier, they said. To make it easy for whom? The silence of the house began to suffocate me. It was not a silence of peace, but of waiting. As if everything there knew that something had been decided without me. For the first time since the funeral, I felt anger mixed with sadness, an uncomfortable but strangely arousing feeling. I got up and went to the bedroom, where boxes still closed took up half the space. My husband's things that I didn't have the courage to touch. I thought about how everything had been too fast, the death, the burial, the decisions. No one asked me if I was ready. They just moved on. At that moment, I understood that my fragility had been convenient. I had been seen as someone incapable, someone who could be guided, pushed, convinced. And that hurt more than the loss of the house itself. I took a deep breath and, for the first time in weeks, made a conscious decision. I needed to understand exactly what had been done in my name. That silence was not going to protect me. He would only swallow me if I let him. My son arrived that afternoon unannounced, as if he still had the key to the house, and he did. Hearing the door open caused me a strange startle, a mixture of relief and discomfort. He came in talking, asking if I had eaten, if I was feeling well, using that tone that mixes care with authority. I let him. At that moment, I still let him. He sat in front of me as someone who comes to solve pending issues. He said he needed to talk to me about some practical things, words I had already learned to fear. He talked about the house, the cost of maintaining it, how it was too big for me now. I listened in silence, trying to keep up with the reasoning as my heart beat faster with each sentence. When I mentioned the call from the broker, I saw something quickly pass through his face. It was no surprise. It was irritation. He took a deep breath and said that I shouldn't answer unknown numbers, that it only made me anxious. That answer, so rehearsed, made something turn inside me. This is not how one reacts to a serious mistake. He began to explain that everything had been done with my good in mind, that I had agreed, that I had signed. He used words like planning, security, future. At no time did he ask if I remembered. He just said that I had agreed, as if that were enough to make it all legitimate. I felt a strange shame, as if I was failing by not remembering. As if the problem was my memory, my age, my emotional state. He reinforced this with calculated care, saying that I was very fragile, that maybe it would not be good for me to get involved with these decisions now. Let me sort it out, he said, as he had so many times before. I looked at him trying to recognize the boy I raised. The stubborn teenager, the confident adult. But there, sitting in front of me, there was someone who spoke to me as if I were an obstacle to be bypassed. Not a mother. Not a housewife. Just a problem to be managed. When I asked to see the documents, he hesitated. He said that he didn't have everything there, that he would show me later, that I didn't have to worry. That soft, almost affectionate refusal was more revealing than any confession. For the first time, I was sure that something was being hidden from me. He got up, put my blanket on the couch and said he would come back the next day. Before leaving, he repeated that I should trust him. The door closed, and the silence returned, but now it was different. It wasn't just empty. It was alert. I sat there for a long time, reliving every word, every pause, every diversion of the subject. My son wasn't protecting me. I was controlling myself. And the worst part was realizing that he truly believed he had the right to do this. That night, I couldn't sleep. The trust one had in him began to crack, making room for a question that hurt more than any other. Since when had he been deciding my life without telling me? And, most importantly, how far he was willing to go. The next day, I woke up with a heavy feeling in my chest, as if something was about to fall on me. Still in my pajamas, I went to the living room table where my son used to leave envelopes and folders when he came to solve things. I opened drawers, searched without much hope, until I found a thin folder, forgotten behind a pile of old mail. My name was written on it. That was enough for my hands to start shaking. I sat down slowly and started flipping through the documents. They were contracts, authorizations, terms that I did not fully understand, full of difficult words and recent dates. On more than one page, I saw my signature, or something that looked a lot like her. I recognized the design of the letters, but I did not recognize the moment when I had made them. My mind went back to confusing images. I remembered afternoons when I could barely keep my eyes open, the effect of the medications, the constant pain in my head. People talking to me, saying that I needed to sign to solve pending issues, to facilitate processes, to not have a headache later. I trusted it. I have always trusted. What scared me the most was not seeing my name there, but realizing how everything had been organized in silence. Dates right after the funeral. Notarization. All too fast for someone who could barely remember what day of the week it was. It was not carelessness. It was a hurry. In one of the papers, I found something that made me stop breathing for a few seconds, a broad authorization, giving my son powers to make decisions on my behalf. Sell, negotiate, subscribe. I read that part several times, trying to understand how it had ended up there without me realizing the real weight of what I was doing. I felt a mixture of fear and humiliation. I had been reduced to a signature, to a body that was present but truly absent. They didn't have to forcibly push me away. It was enough to wait for me to be weak enough not to question it. I closed the folder tightly, as if it could erase what I had seen. But he couldn't. The image of those papers was engraved on me. For the first time, I considered the possibility that everything had been calculated. That my grief had been an opportunity. I walked around the house trying to organize my thoughts. Every corner now seemed laden with suspicion. My son's frequent visits, the phone calls he answered away from me, the repeated phrases about me not having to worry. It all made too much sense. I felt like crying, but I didn't. Something inside me was beginning to harden, still fragile, still confused, but different. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. There was evidence, even if I didn't know what to do with it yet. At that moment, I realized that my greatest darkness had not been grief. It had been trusting without seeing. And now that I had seen it, there was no turning back. I kept the documents again, but not in the same way. Not as someone who hides, but as someone who knows he will need them. The darkness had served for them to act. From then on, I needed light. My son returned in the late afternoon, accompanied by his younger sister. Her presence was not common, and that put me on alert immediately. They sat together, side by side, as if they had rehearsed that conversation. I remained standing for a few seconds before sitting down as well, feeling that, somehow, this was no longer a dialogue between equals. She began speaking in a very soft tone, saying that she was worried about me, that I seemed confused, very shaken since her father's death. Hearing that from someone I had raised myself was like taking a silent blow. I tried to say that I was fine, that I just wanted to understand what was happening with the house, but I was interrupted with looks exchanged between them. My son took the floor again, saying that I shouldn't touch papers, that it only increased my anxiety. She said that the sale of the house was necessary, that I couldn't afford to live there alone, that it was dangerous. Each sentence was disguised as care, but it carried a clear message: I was no longer capable. When I mentioned the documents I found, the mood changed. My daughter folded her arms, visibly annoyed, and said that I had agreed with everything, that it was not fair now to create trouble. Problems. That's what she called my attempt to understand what had been done with my own life. They started listing possibilities as if I wasn't there. They spoke of smaller houses, of assisted residences, of someone to accompany me. At no time did they ask what I wanted. I was the subject, but not the person. I felt a chill run down my back when my son mentioned, almost casually, that maybe it would be good for me to undergo a medical evaluation. He said it was just to be sure, just in case. That word, evaluation, sounded like a threat. I knew what was behind it. I raised my voice, something rare for me, and said that I had not agreed to leave my house, that I wanted to see everything calmly. The silence that followed was heavy. My daughter shook her head, disappointed, as if I was being ungrateful. They stood up shortly after, leaving in the air the feeling that I had failed to cooperate. Before leaving, my son repeated that everything was being done for my good, but his look no longer hid his impatience. Patience exists only as long as there is obedience. When the door closed, my legs gave way, and I sat slowly on the couch. My heart was beating fast, not with sadness, but with fear. They were organizing. It wasn't just about the house. It was about moving away from any control. At that moment, I realized that the betrayal did not come only from a hidden plan, but from a collective decision, that I was disposable. And if I didn't react, they would make it look like a favor. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my body. I was still there. I still understood. I still knew who I was. And, even surrounded, something inside me began to prepare to fight. That morning, the sky was gray, heavy, as if following the state of my chest. I went out to put the trash on the sidewalk more out of habit than necessity, trying to pretend that there was still a normal routine in my life. It was then that I noticed the stare coming from the house opposite. Helen stood there, standing by the fence, watching too closely to be a coincidence. There was something about her way that made me stop halfway. Helen was always discreet, but never indifferent. One of those people who listens more than they talk and keeps details that others ignore. When he approached, he asked if I was okay, but it wasn't an automatic question. She looked me in the eyes, waiting for a real answer. For the first time since the funeral, I felt that someone was not just fulfilling a role. I replied that I was going, the polite lie that everyone uses. But something in me gave way, and I ended up mentioning the strange call I had received about selling the house. The moment I said that, her face changed. Her brows furrowed, and she was silent for a few seconds, as if confirming an old suspicion before speaking. Helen said she needed to tell me something, and that simple warning made my stomach turn. She said that, days before my husband's funeral, she had seen men in suits coming in and out of my house. Briefcases in hand, cars parked for a short time, quick conversations at the door. He said he thought it was strange, but assumed it was something from the family. It didn't feel like a morning thing, she added, carefully. As she spoke, images began to fit in my head. I remembered the times I woke up from the couch with someone closing the door, the interrupted conversations when I entered the living room, the excess of worry about my rest. Everything I had ignored now gained contour and weight. I invited Helen in. We sat at the kitchen table, and I brought the folder with the documents. Unlike my family, she read calmly, pointing out dates, asking who had been with me during that period, questioning why everything had been done so quickly. There was no judgment in his voice, only logic. That gave me unexpected relief. She said something that stuck with me: "They counted on you not being in a position to notice." It was not a direct accusation, but a finding. For the first time, someone named what I had been feeling without treating me as incapable. It wasn't crazy. It was strategy, theirs. Helen then told me that her sister had gone through something similar years ago, also after her husband's death. She spoke of manipulation, of signatures torn out in moments of fragility, of how her family had tried to remove her from decisions. He said that if he hadn't sought outside help, he would have lost everything. Hearing that was like looking into a mirror of the future that I needed to avoid. She held my hand firmly and asked if I was willing to face whatever came my way, even if it meant breaking up with my children for good. The question hurt more than any document, but the answer was already forming inside me. I didn't want to fight. I wanted to exist. Helen gave me the contact of a serious lawyer, someone who dealt precisely with cases of elder abuse and family manipulation. He said that he was not impressed by well-rehearsed stories or by outraged relatives. When she got up to leave, I felt that something had changed in the air of the house. After I closed the door, the silence returned, but it was not the same. It was not empty. He was attentive. For the first time, I felt that I was not alone on the wrong side of history. I was still afraid, I was still tired, but now I knew that someone saw what was happening. And at that moment, I understood that their greatest weapon had been to underestimate me. From then on, this began to turn into the biggest mistake they made. The day I went to the office of the lawyer appointed by Helen, I felt as if I were crossing an invisible border. It wasn't just a legal consultation, it was the first time I'd admitted, out loud, that my own family might have deceived me. The building was simple, not at all luxurious, and that reassured me. It didn't seem like a place where cold decisions crushed fragile people. It seemed like a place where stories were heard. I told everything slowly, from my husband's death to the call from the broker, to my son's constant visits and the papers that appeared without clear explanation. The lawyer did not interrupt me once. He just took notes, looking up at specific moments, as if mentally marking important points. That quiet attention made me feel, for the first time in months, respected. When I handed him the documents, he took longer than I expected to speak. He leafed through page by page, checked dates, signatures, stamps. At one point, she frowned and asked to know exactly when my husband had died. Upon hearing the date, he let out a contained sigh and said something that made my heart race. These movements started before that. He explained to me that there were clear indications of planning prior to my husband's death. Transfers of values, equity adjustments, broad authorizations made strategically. These were not emergency decisions. They were pieces of an old, silent plan that just needed the right moment to be completed. The revelation hit me hard. I spent years believing that my marriage had been based on absolute trust. Knowing that my husband may have hidden debts, agreements, and intentions, possibly involving our own son, made everything I knew tremble. It wasn't just the sale of the house. It was the whole basis of my life being questioned. The lawyer was careful when speaking. He said that families often construct narratives to justify abuse, especially when the victim is older or emotionally fragile. He spoke of cases in which children feel entitled to decide everything, convinced that they know more than their parents. I heard it as if finally finding words for old feelings. He warned me that the path would not be easy. There would be resistance, accusations, attempts to paint me as confused or ungrateful. He also said that I needed to prepare myself to discover things that I might rather not know. Still, he asked if I wanted to move forward. He did not answer for me. He didn't decide for me. I took a deep breath before answering. I felt afraid, yes, but I felt something bigger, indignation. It wasn't fair that everything had been done in the shadows, using my pain as a cover. He said he wanted to continue, that he needed the truth, whatever the cost. As I left the office, I walked a few blocks without noticing the time passing. The world looked the same, but I wasn't. An old secret had come to light, and it explained much more than I would have liked. The betrayal was not recent. She had deep roots. That day, I understood that I wasn't just fighting for the house. I was fighting to regain my history, my lucidity, and my right to be seen as someone whole. And even though I didn't know everything yet, one thing was already clear: nothing I believed about my family was as simple as I thought. The letter arrived 2 days after the meeting with the lawyer, as if it had been sent to remind me that I didn't have much time. The envelope was white, impersonal, with my name printed too cleanly. Before I even opened it, I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the intuition screaming that nothing there would be simple. I sat at the kitchen table, took a deep breath, and only then tore the paper with exaggerated care, as if that might soften the impact. The words were direct, cold, without any trace of humanity. A formal notice stating that the property had been sold and that I should arrange for the eviction within a certain period. There were dates, clauses, protocol numbers. No line asked if I had anywhere to go. None of them recognized that this house was more than an address. It was as if I was just an administrative obstacle. I felt my blood run cold when I read, further down, the mention of a valid power of attorney granting broad powers to my son. There was again that authorization that I barely remembered having signed, now used as a weapon against me. It was not just a vague threat. It was concrete, documented, ready to be executed. Shortly after, my phone rang. It was my son. I answered with a trembling hand, and he wasted no time with kindnesses. He said that the letter had arrived, that everything was now official, and that I needed to cooperate so as not to complicate things. The way he spoke to me left no room for dialogue. It was an order disguised as advice. When I asked where I would go, he replied that it would be resolved later. He again mentioned the idea of an assisted place, of someone to take care of me. That sounded like a slow push out of my own life. For the first time, I clearly heard the threat behind the words. If I resisted, they would make it seem like I couldn't decide anything. I hung up the phone feeling a fear unlike anything I had ever felt. It wasn't just sadness or betrayal. It was the real feeling of being about to lose my home, my independence, my identity. All at the same time. I walked around the room touching the furniture, as if I was saying goodbye before I even fought. I remembered the conversations about medical evaluations, about my confusion. I understood that this was part of something bigger. It wasn't enough to get me out of the house. They wanted to take me out of the equation. To become someone who didn't need to be heard, just managed. I called the lawyer with a choked voice. He listened carefully and said something that, although harsh, gave me strength. Now they have shown the haste. It helps us. He explained that such direct threats revealed insecurity, that no one acts like that when they are completely sure that everything is legitimate. I hung up feeling the fear still present, but mixed with something new. Anger. Not an explosive anger, but firm, hot, that kept me standing. They had gone too far. It was no longer just about papers. It was about erasing me. That night, lying in the bed that still held my husband's scent, I made a silent decision. I wouldn't leave that house without a fight. They could try to paint me as weak, confused, disposable. But I still knew exactly who I was, and that was something they could never get out of me. I returned to the lawyer's office with the letter folded inside my bag, as if it were a dangerous object. Each step so far seemed heavier than the last, but I knew I couldn't back down. When I sat down in front of him and placed the formal notice on the table, I didn't have to explain much. He read it carefully, and for the first time I saw a faint smile come out, not of joy, but of confirmation. He said that letter was a strategic mistake. He explained that no one pressures a fragile widow in this way when everything is legally impeccable. The haste betrayed fear. Fear that I would start asking too many questions, that someone from the outside would look at the documents carefully. That gave me a strange sense of relief. For the first time, time seemed to be on my side. The lawyer began to ask very specific questions. Where exactly was I when I signed the papers? Who was present? What medicines was I taking at that time? Had anyone explained to me clearly what those documents meant? Each question seemed to open a drawer of my memory, and fragmented answers began to emerge. I told of the afternoons when I could barely keep my eyes open, of the automatic trust in my son, of the phrases repeated like mantras, "It's just to make it easier, don't worry about it now." He wrote everything down precisely, like someone who assembles a puzzle that already knows the final drawing. He then explained something I had never considered. Consent is not just a signature. It is understanding, clarity, freedom of choice. I said that if it was proven that I was emotionally vulnerable and medicated, it could completely change the weight of those documents. For the first time, my fragility ceased to be a defect and became an evidence. We also talked about the power of attorney. He pointed out abusive clauses, too broad, without clear limitations. He said that this type of document is often used to take away autonomy from the elderly under the pretext of help. Hearing that hurt, but it also strengthened me. My story was not unique, and that meant there were ways to respond. I asked if I had a chance. He did not promise victory, but was honest in saying that there were enough irregularities to move the case forward. He said that confrontation would be inevitable, and that I needed to be prepared for harsh accusations, especially from my own family. It wouldn't just be a legal battle. It would be emotional. I took a deep breath and said I was ready. Not because she was strong, but because she was tired of being treated as invisible. He nodded, as if he was already waiting for that answer, and said that he would immediately begin gathering evidence and requesting additional documents. As I left the office, I felt something different in my body. There was still fear, but it no longer paralyzed me. For the first time since my husband's death, I felt like someone was asking the right questions, the ones that no one in my family ever wanted to be asked. And as I walked back home, I was sure of one thing: they had counted on I returned to the lawyer's office a few days later, believing that I was already prepared for anything. I was wrong. There is a kind of truth that does not come screaming, but whispering, and precisely for this reason it tears deeper. He asked me to sit down and warned carefully that what he had discovered would change the way I saw my marriage, my son, and even my own history. He began by explaining about the debts. They were not recent, nor small. They came from years ago, hidden under layers of justifications, silent renegotiations, and informal agreements. My husband had used the house as collateral more than once, without ever telling me. And he was not alone in this. My son knew. I always knew. I felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. My marriage, which I had always believed to be based on partnership and honesty, now turned out to be full of omissions. It was not just a one-off failure. It was a pattern. While I took care of the house, the family, the life we built, serious decisions were being made without me. The lawyer showed documents that indicated conversations and financial transactions made long before my husband's death. The sale of the house was not an emergency solution. It was the last step in an old plan, designed to cover up past mistakes and protect those who made them. I was just the inconvenient variable. What hurt me the most was understanding that my son did not act on impulse or desperation. He acted with calculation. She believed that, weakened by grief, I would accept any explanation. And if I didn't accept, he already had a way prepared to silence me: the power of attorney, the evaluations, the discourse of confusion. I asked if my husband had done this to protect me. The lawyer hesitated before answering. He said that, in many cases, this is the justification used. But protecting is not hiding. Protecting is not taking away the right to choose. Hearing that was like losing my husband a second time, now not to death, but to the truth. I left the office with a heavy chest and a full head. I walked aimlessly for a few minutes, trying to fit happy memories with that new reality. The trips, the laughs, the plans. Everything continued to exist, but now there were visible cracks. Happiness was not a lie, but it was not whole either. I cried sitting on a park bench, something I hadn't done since the funeral. I didn't just cry for the house or the betrayal. I cried for the woman I was, who trusted without imagining that she was being excluded from her own life. I cried for the time that does not come back. When I pulled myself together, something was different. The pain was still there, but it didn't bend anymore. She supported me. Knowing the truth, no matter how cruel, took me out of the position of a confused victim. I now understood the game. And understanding changes everything. That day, I made a clear decision: I would no longer ask for emotional explanations. I would not seek regret or excuses. I would seek justice. The truth had hurt, but it had also woken me up. And I didn't intend to go back to sleep. This part that comes now is the hardest to share, because by telling it, I relive the pain of realizing that I was betrayed just when I was most vulnerable. Talking about it means giving up the silence that protected me for a long time and accepting the weight of being seen in full. If you've come this far, it's because you understand that some truths only survive when someone has the courage to say them out loud. So I ask you, sign up, not as a support for me, but as a way to ensure that voices like this are not erased. After everything I discovered, I realized that I could no longer allow myself to live on automatic. Something inside me had shifted. Sadness still existed, grief still weighed heavily, but now there was also lucidity. I began to observe everything more closely: every call, every message, every unexpected visit. I no longer accepted vague explanations or ready-made sentences. I began by revisiting my own routine, realizing how much I had been led without realizing it. I spent years trusting that others would know what was best for me, and that had put me right where I was now. It wasn't my fault that I trusted, but it was my responsibility not to remain blind. My son tried to call me several times that week. I ignored some calls, answered others in a short and objective way. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to justify anything. Every conversation was a test, and he seemed disconcerted to realize that I no longer reacted as I had before: confused, hesitant, insecure. I asked questions. And questions bother you. I started to write everything down: dates, times, who said what. Something I never imagined doing with my own family. But it was either that or continue to be treated as someone incapable. I found that paying attention was an act of resistance. Helen was still there, calling me every day, asking how I was doing. Her presence reminded me that I wasn't exaggerating, that I wasn't alone in this. Having someone who believed in me made all the difference. Solitude is the perfect terrain for manipulation. I also started to look at myself differently in the mirror. I no longer saw only the tired widow, with deep dark circles under her eyes and hair tied up without care. He saw someone who had survived losses and was still standing. Age, which once seemed like a weakness, began to reveal itself as an experience. I went to the doctor on my own, without telling anyone in the family. I wanted to officially record that I was lucid, conscious, capable of making decisions. That consultation, simple and objective, was a huge step. I was taking back control of my body and my narrative. Every small gesture, a call made by me, a document read calmly, a decision made without asking permission, reinforced something new within me. I didn't have to be aggressive. He needed to be firm. And firmness, I learned, scares more than screams. Deep down, I knew the confrontation was approaching. I felt it in the air, in the shorter messages, in the prolonged silences. But now I didn't expect the impact anymore. I was preparing for it. I was still a wounded woman, yes. But she was no longer a lost woman. The fragile widow was beginning to give way to someone attentive, strategic, impossible to ignore. And whoever bet on my weakness was about to find out about it in the hardest possible way. The meeting took place in the living room of the house, the same place where we celebrate birthdays, important dates, and so many happy decisions over the years. Now, the environment seemed shrunken, loaded with tension. My son arrived first, followed by my daughter. They sat on the couch without inviting me, as if that position was already theirs. I stood for a few seconds, taking a deep breath before sitting down in front, feeling that this moment would change everything. I began speaking calmly, something that clearly disconcerted them. He said that I knew about the old debts, the agreements made before my husband's death and the planned sale of the house. I didn't raise my voice. I just put the facts on the table. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of their nervous breathing. My son was the first to react. He denied, minimized, said that I was being influenced by outsiders, who were putting ideas in my head. The way he spoke made it clear that, for him, I was still someone easily manipulated. That which would have hurt me deeply before, now only confirmed what I already knew. My daughter tried a different path. He said that everything had been done to protect me, that I couldn't bear to know the truth at the time. He used grief as a justification, as if the pain took away my right to choose. Hearing that was like receiving a sentence. They really believed that deciding for me was an act of love. When I mentioned the possibility of legally questioning the power of attorney and the sale, the mood changed for good. My son lost his temper. He said I was being ungrateful, that after everything he did, I still had the courage to threaten him. The word threat echoed in the room, revealing the fear he was trying to hide. It was then that he said something that froze me, that if I insisted, they could prove that I was not well, that there were doctors, records, people willing to confirm this. It wasn't a direct threat, but it was clear enough. They were willing to destroy me so as not to lose control. I looked at them with a serenity that I did not recognize myself. He said that he had already undergone a recent medical evaluation, of his own volition, and that he was fully capable of deciding. The surprise on their faces was immediate. For the first time, their script failed. My daughter tried to appease, saying that there was still time to solve everything as a family. But I knew what that meant, to return to silence, to submission, to obedience. He said that the family had ceased to be a safe place at the moment when decisions were made in secret. The confrontation ended without hugs, without apologies, without reconciliation. Only with the certainty that there was no turning back. When they left, I felt a mixture of pain and relief. Losing the illusion hurts. But maintaining a lie costs much more. I was alone in the room for a long time, observing the space where everything had been said. I had faced my children, something I never imagined doing. And despite my heavy heart, one thing was clear, I had regained my voice. And that, no one else would take away from me. The day of the hearing arrived faster than I expected, as if time had decided to speed up just to test me. I woke up before the alarm clock, my heart beating steady but strangely steady. It was no longer the despair of the early days. It was tension, yes, but also preparation. I knew why I was there. The forum was cold, impersonal, made to remind people that feelings do not have priority in that space. I sat next to my lawyer, feeling the weight of the environment, the high walls, the silence broken only by hurried steps. When I saw my son enter, accompanied by an overconfident lawyer, I felt a brief grip, not of fear, but of sadness for what we have become. As the hearing began, I heard my name being pronounced in a formal, almost distant way. That woman mentioned in the records looked like someone else, but it was me. And, for the first time, I didn't feel diminished by it. I was there to be heard, officially, publicly, without familiar filters. Their lawyer spoke first. It painted a portrait of me as a fragile, confused woman, unable to deal with complex decisions. He said that my son had acted out of love, out of responsibility. Hearing that was painful, but not unexpected. It was exactly the speech I had learned to recognize. When it was my turn, my lawyer was direct. He presented documents, dates, sequences that did not explain themselves. It showed how important decisions had been made when I was on heavy medication, newly widowed, without independent follow-up. Every detail dismantled the narrative of care and revealed control. Then I was called to speak. I stood up slowly, feeling all the eyes on me. My voice came out firm, even with the lump in my throat. I told him how confusing those days had been, how I trusted my son completely, how I was never explained the real impact of what I signed. I didn't ask for pity. I just told the truth. There was a specific moment when I saw the judge look up from the papers and stare at me with real attention. Not as someone who evaluates a process, but as someone who evaluates a person. At that moment, I felt that something had changed. I was no longer just a case. I was someone present. My son avoided looking at me. When our eyes met for a second, I saw something I had never seen before: insecurity. The power he believed he had didn't seem so solid in the face of public exposure. That didn't bring me satisfaction. It brought clarity. The hearing ended without an immediate decision, but with requests for diligence, reviews, deeper analyses. To many, that would seem little. For me, it was huge. It meant that my story had not been discarded. That my words had weight. As I left the courthouse, I breathed in the cold air of the street as if it were the first time. The public confrontation had taken place. The truth had been spoken aloud, recorded, impossible to erase. Regardless of the final result, I had already won something essential. I had ceased to be treated as a silent problem. Now, I was a woman who had faced everything in the open. And that changes any game. The decision did not come out on the day of the hearing, nor the following week. The wait was a silent test, perhaps the most difficult of all. Each morning I woke up not knowing if that house would still be mine on paper, even though I knew that, emotionally, it had already been deeply violated. I learned to live with this uncertainty as someone who learns to breathe in shallow water, carefully, without sudden movements. When I finally received the call from the lawyer, I recognized the tone of his voice even before the words. It was not euphoria, nor defeat. It was realism. He said the judge had recognized serious irregularities in the process, especially related to my emotional state and the way the power of attorney was used. The sale would not simply be validated as they had hoped. Something had been broken. The decision prevented any immediate eviction and determined a complete review of the acts practiced in my name. It was not the magic return of everything, nor an exemplary punishment. It was possible justice, within the limits of the system. A compromise that protected my dignity, even if it did not heal all losses. My son didn't call me. My daughter sent a short message, saying that it had all gone too far and that it was destroying the family. I read those words with a calmness that surprised me. The family had not been destroyed at that time. It had been destroyed when they decided that I didn't deserve to know the truth. There was a high cost. Broken relationships, prolonged silence, crossed glances when we met in common spaces of the city. Some people walked away, others whispered. I discovered that justice is not always accompanied by social approval. Sometimes she comes alone. The house has not gone back to the way it had been. Even temporarily protected, it carried invisible marks. It was no longer the place where I felt safe automatically. It was a space that needed to be resignified, rebuilt from the inside. And that required more courage than simply leaving or staying. Financially, I had to reorganize myself. I cut expenses, sold things, learned to deal with numbers that I previously avoided. What they always said I wouldn't know how to do became part of my routine. Each bill paid by myself was a small act of affirmation. The hardest thing was to accept that there would be no real apology. Not the way we imagine, with regret and recognition. Their silence was the answer. And as painful as it was, I had to accept that in order to move on. The sentence did not give me back everything, but it gave me back something essential: limits. They learned that I could no longer be crossed without consequence. And I learned that I don't have to win completely to not be defeated. Paying the price of truth hurt, but living in lies would have cost much more. And at that moment, even tired, I knew I had made the only possible choice to continue being me. In the months following the sentence, life did not return to normal, and I no longer wanted it to return. Normal was to trust without questioning, it was to give space so as not to bother, it was to disappear a little with each decision made by me. What I needed now was something else: stability built with consciousness, even if it was simpler, more solitary, quieter. The house was still there, but I no longer saw it as before. It had gone from being just a place of happy memories to becoming a symbol of my resistance. Every corner held pain, yes, but also courage. Gradually, I reorganized the spaces, getting rid of objects that no longer made sense, creating new rituals. The house no longer defined me, I redefined it. My relationship with my children never fully recovered. There are brief conversations, formal meetings, distant care. There is no longer blind intimacy, nor automatic trust. Coming to terms with that was one of the hardest griefs. But it was also liberating. I no longer needed to beg for respect where it didn't exist. I found strength in unexpected places. Helen continued to be present, now not only as an ally, but as a friend. I started attending community meetings, getting involved in small local activities. I found that I still had a lot to offer, even after everything. Or maybe precisely because of everything. I learned to take care of my finances, to make decisions on my own, to say no without apologizing. Simple things, which once seemed too big to me, have become part of my routine. Each choice I made reinforced the woman I was becoming, less naive, more attentive, deeply alive. Sometimes, I still feel sadness. There are nights when silence is heavy, when the memory of my husband is mixed with disappointment. But I don't blame myself for that anymore. Loving was not the mistake. The mistake would have been to continue accepting to be deleted. I look back and see a woman who was underestimated in the most fragile moment of her life. I look ahead and see someone who has learned, late perhaps, but firmly. I didn't come out unscathed. Nobody leaves. But I left in one piece. There was no happy ending in the traditional sense. There was no full reconciliation, no perfect justice. There was something rarer, honest reconstruction. With losses, with limits, with dignity. If there is a victory in this story, it is not in the house, nor in the documents, nor in the sentence. It's in the fact that I'll never be treated as invisible again, because I've learned not to ignore myself. And that, after all, is what is really left standing. If this story touched you on any level, please share this video. Not only as a personal account, but as a reflection of patterns that still silence, control and erase people in moments of vulnerability. By sharing, you help bring this message to those who need to recognize that they are not alone, and that breaking the silence is also an act of collective courage. I'll stay here reading each comment carefully. Tell me, from which city or country are you watching, and what about this story has stayed with you? Your words really matter to me.